Starting us off at number 10 is the Afterlife Cul De Sac. So what is the only show on Cartoon Network set in a cul-de-sac? Ed, and Eddie. Double D was my favorite, let me just put it out there. He deserved more lines and appreciation, I'm just saying. Anyway, this theory is actually wild. It claims the kids who lived in the cul-de-sac are actually all dead, and the neighborhood is some kind of afterlife / purgatory. Since all the kids are different ages, they all died between 1900 and 2000, but because they all died in the cul-de-sac, they all stayed there. Think about it, the show has no other kids, no parents, just the kids we see, and even they are a bit weird. I mean, they all look a bit sickly, they all have blue tongues, which like, hello, corpse tongues. Okay, say if we had to analyze the kids, Rolf is farm obsessed and tends to his animals, so he probably died in the early 1900s. Ed and Sarah were from the 50s because Sarah is controlling as hell, and Ed is a dumbass who simply thrives on comics, which were very popular at the time. Naz is a 60s or 70s child, obviously she's carefree, a bit of a flirt, you get the gist. And Kevin was a 90s kid because he's a bully, he rides his bike as an escape, and his dad was most likely controlling and abusive, which is why in the afterlife he imagines his dad showering him with a lot of gifts. Now I'm not saying this is a foolproof theory, but I'm also not saying that. Coming in at number 9 are the post-apocalyptic Flintstones Part 1. Again, one of my favorite shows. I even saw the old live action remake and loved it. Have yet to go as Betty for Halloween, but soon come, I promise. Anyway, based off the show, you'd assume Bedrock was situated in the Stone Age. I mean, why wouldn't you? They're called the Flintstones, they live in Bedrock, this is basically Stone Age propaganda. Either way, this theory claims they actually live in a post-apocalyptic society. Now think about it, the show is basically based on the modern West. They reference technology, religion, culture all the time. Stone Age people didn't have any of that. The theory goes on to say after many nuclear disasters, the entirety of Western civilization collapsed, and so the generations after them recovered just enough to create a society based on what they remembered. At number 8, we have the post-apocalyptic Flintstones Part 2. I love when the theories are so juicy they need a part 2. I'm just sat there like, yes girl, yes! Anyways, the sub-theory features the crossover we all died for. The Jetsons meet the Flintstones. I wanted to be in the Jetsons so bad. When I watched it when I was young, I literally thought by now, like by 2019, we'd be living in a world like that, yet we still even have like flying cars or houses. This is shocking. Well, I've been fed lies, this is a betrayal. Either way, moving swiftly on before I get further triggered. The theory goes on to say the Flintstones and the Jetsons actually lived in the same world at the same time. In this post-apocalyptic society they live in, we became so divided that one group live in a super advanced society, whereas another group is barely hanging on the edges of technology. All the talking animals living with the Flintstones are synthetic creations. I mean, all the real animals have been extinct for 5 ever, and no one acknowledges how stupid it is for them to talk to things that didn't even exist with early humans. But you know, that's none of my business. Filling our number 7 slot is Scooby-Dooby Depression. I literally bought all the extra Scooby-Doo long episode movie things as a kid, and I can't tell you how many times I've watched both live action movies. That is my shit. But either way, from their slang, all the flowers on the mystery machine, even the gang's clothing, you can tell the show was set in the 60s. And the theory claims that it was set during one of the worst economic depressions ever. And if you think about it long enough, it actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the show, everything is either falling apart or abandoned. Hotels are empty, theme parks are ruined, every villain they catch is actually someone who would normally be respected, you know, like a teacher or a scientist or a historian, but they've just fallen on hard times and have just turned to petty crime in this dark period of life. And no, I definitely didn't forget about the gang. You'd think they were just hippies out looking for adventure, but really they're like in their late teens, early 20s, not interested in getting proper jobs. They move around all the time because there are no jobs available no matter where they go. They wear the same clothes every day. Do they shower? No one really knows for sure. Do they pay for petrol? I don't know. In conclusion, they're unemployed hobos that accept petrol and food for helping those around them. Knife in my heart, dagger in my chest. Now at number 6 is the Rugrats affair. Now this was a cute show, I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't my favorite because I thought I was just too grown up for that baby stuff, but it did the job. According to this theory, which I'm sure many of you have heard before, most of the babies on the show aren't real apparently. They're all figments of Angelica's imagination since she actually has no friends. That sounded really savage, I didn't mean it like that. Angelica, you're a lovely girl. She makes up these friends to make up for the fact her parents are too busy working to make time for her. Angelica Angelica bases all her friends on the dead children of her parents' friends. I don't know how believable that bit was, but we carry on anyway. Tommy was stillborn, which explains why Stu is always in the basement making toys. Chucky died with his mum, which explains why Chaz is a nervous wreck 24/7, and Phil and Lil were actually aborted or their parents suffered a miscarriage. So because Angelica didn't know the baby's gender, she just created twins. What do you guys think? Viable or Coming in at number 5 is Courage the Cowardly Delusion. Now this was my least favorite show on the channel and I never wanted to watch it. Who makes a kids show that creepy and dark? I don't get it. Courage was definitely its own niche, and this theory claims Courage was actually Cerberus the Hellhound. Think about it, his only goal in every episode is to protect Muriel and Eustace and the house in the middle of nowhere. Their house is legit in the middle of a barren hellhole, so Courage aka Cerberus always stays in hell, which is nowhere, to protect mankind aka Muriel from the underworld, which is characterized by all the villains he meets. LeQuack representing greed, Cats representing hate, and etc. And if you're wondering where that leaves Eustace, he's Hades and he rules over and hates everything in hell. And honestly, I can totally see this theory being true. You guys, I wouldn't even bat an eyelid, I wouldn't even be surprised. At number 4 is Inspector Gadget versus Inspector Gadget. I only remember watching this show while having breakfast and getting ready for primary school in the morning. Like, I don't recall it ever being on in the evening. Is that just me? Let me know. Either way, Inspector Gadget was always up against his arch nemesis Dr. Claw, but we never got to see his face. It's like Miss Bellum in the Powerpuff Girls, like, that fat, I know she's gonna be hot, just show me her. Sorry, got sidetracked, but you know, when she's slim thick, she's slim thick, you know? Either way, this theory claims there's a very specific reason we never get to see Dr. Claw, because he is the original Inspector Gadget. Gasp. The original Inspector Gadget was actually a cop who died on the job, but he was the police force's best guy and they couldn't bear to part with him. So they built a robot that acted and looked exactly like him, but there was one problem. The guy never actually died, he survived, and when he saw that he was replaced with a robot, he became bitter and turned into the notorious Dr. Claw. I mean, it explains why they're never in the same place at the same time, so you never know. Filling our number 3 slot is Samurai Utonium. I can proudly say I think I've seen nearly all the Powerpuff Girls episodes, and thankfully I tried to avoid Samurai Jack as much as possible, but I heard they rebooted it a few years ago, hope that's good. But can we just acknowledge the fact that Jack is literally Professor Utonium but with a man bun and a katana? Like, this theory claims that Jack and Professor Utonium are the same person, and that during his final showdown with Aku, Jack and him are launched into a time portal that Aku himself created. By using all his dark power, Aku gets turned into a liquid version of himself, which translates to Chemical X in a new world and time period that Jack aka Professor Utonium now lives in. Jack/Utonium dedicates his life to studying Chemical X and eventually makes good use of Aku by creating the girls. So he was evil, but the girls combat that, so it just really comes full circle, doesn't it? Now at number 2 is Foster's Home for Imaginary Blank Part 1. I absolutely loved Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. It was so cute and funny and refreshing, and all the little imaginary friends were just little gems. Either way, the premise of the show is that kids have imaginary friends that everyone can see and we all just kind of coexist. When kids outgrow their imaginary friends, they give them to Foster's Home, created by Madam Foster. It gives the imaginary friends shelter and the option to get adopted by new kids. Now, Madam Foster runs the house with her granddaughter Frankie and her own imaginary friend Mr. Harriman. This theory argues that Madam Foster isn't real. She died due to old age and Frankie was heartbroken and just couldn't get over the loss. So she probably imagined Madam Foster so no one would find out at the home because she was so dearly loved. I mean, this honestly explains why Madam Foster is always so childlike and energetic despite being ancient. It also ties in with why Frankie just can't move on from her life at Foster's because the home is actually hers. Finally, at number 1 is Foster's Home for Imaginary Blank Part 2. The juiciness of the theory continues, but the twist here is that Frankie is actually the imaginary friend, not Madam Foster. The other side of this theory argues Frankie is just a younger version of Madam Foster. They're even wearing the same thing. Madam Foster imagined up Frankie because if it was up to her, she would have been a lot younger when managing the home, but she's just too old for it now. Think about it, Frankie never has imaginary friends of her own, she doesn't even want one. She acts human, but she's most likely not. And it also explains why she's so happy staying at the home looking after everyone instead of going to college or something, for example. Both are completely plausible. Who do you think is imaginary, Madam Foster or Frankie? Starting us off with number 10 is Johnny the Kid Part 1. I actually watched a lot of Johnny Bravo, mostly because it was usually on around the time I came back from school, and after a stressful day thinking boys had cooties at school, I came back and watched a cartoon about a guy hitting on girls constantly. Great logic, amen. Johnny Bravo was a smooth talking Elvis impersonator, I feel. I mean, he never said he was Elvis, but he just acted like him. Although he looks like a muscly good looking guy on the outside, this theory suggests he's actually just an annoying kid. I mean, think about it, he never ever gets any of the girls he hits on, but that could be because of his approach, but humor me. His best friend is an 8-year-old, which is just strange for a grown man, and he even calls a lot of the girls he wants mama. I know that could be the whole Elvis reference, or it could be the fact he's a child and that's just how he speaks to all the women. What do you guys think? Coming in at number 9 is Johnny the Kid Part 2. Continuing on with Johnny Boy, an alternate theory explores the fact the women he hits on usually hit him or inflict some kind of physical pain when rejecting him, which could be, I mean, screwed up if he was a little kid. But if we just take a look at his behavior and look at the fact he exaggerates about so much, like the man can't even identify a single flaw in himself. In every episode he literally compliments himself 5 times in the first 2 minutes, or 2 seconds, really it's either or. So he could easily just take the pain he feels from the rejection and externalize it into physical pain. Honestly, I'm not totally convinced by this theory. I get how someone could come up with it, but I feel like he genuinely wants these girls to a point it would be very abnormal for a kid. Like, that is his sole mission in every episode, and surely 8-year-old guys aren't that obsessed with getting girls at that age. Please? Hopefully. God knows what's going on these days. At number 8 we have Lucien. I had a love-hate relationship with the Cramp twins. Like, I initially hated the show, but then the more I watched it, the more I realized I really freaking liked it, so I was like, they got me. Anyway, this theory claims that Lucien's life is tragic. I mean, isn't all of ours? The whole show takes place in his head as he goes through foster care. Wayne, his twin brother, was actually stillborn, which is why he's blue and has red around his eyes. His mom Dorothy died a few days after giving birth to Lucien, hence she's yellow, and his dad Horace got so depressed after the death of Wayne and Dorothy that he hung himself, and hence he's green. After everyone basically dies except Lucien, he gets put into the foster system, and the family he ends up with neglects him quite a bit and doesn't give him any attention. Unhappy with his life, as anyone would be, he starts to imagine what it would be like to have a family that loved him, and that's the show, really. His friends play along with his delusions because they are riddled with guilt over his situation. Childhood ruined. Filling our number 7 slot is Coma 10. Whether you choose to admit it or not, Ben 10 was lit. I feel like every episode was so action-packed and interesting, and the tension between Gwen and Kevin was also fab. I loved it, I was here for it. And it was surprisingly easy to remember all the aliens Ben would turn into, even though there were like 10 of them. Either way, this theory takes us back to the first ever episode. In it, Max, Ben, and Gwen are camping, and Ben takes a walk seeing a shooting star on his way. He wishes on it, hoping he won't have a boring summer, and the star starts heading straight for him. He dodges out of the way, and the shooting star ends up being the capsule that had the Omnitrix in it. But what if he didn't dodge it? What if he just tripped on something as he was wishing on the star and he fell unconscious? Think about it. Max and Gwen don't even go looking for him straight away. If that huge thing crashed into the forest, they would have. If Ben just tripped, then they wouldn't have even known that happened, so they wouldn't have looked for him. So everything in the show is happening in Ben's head while he's in a coma. He's a fan of comics and video games, and the aliens he becomes resembles actual heroes. Like, Heat Blast is kind of like Iron Man, even his mask looks similar. And obviously, if Ben wanted not a boring summer, that means he finds Max and Gwen boring, so in his coma state, Max becomes one of the plumbers, and nerdy Gwen becomes a magical martial arts expert. That doesn't even sound like a half bad coma. Although I don't wish to be in a coma, I'm just saying I wouldn't mind being Ben 10 if I was in a coma. Amen 10. There's just no ring to that. Sorry. Now at number 6 is the Scooby Draft. I truly believe Scooby-Doo will go down as one of the best cartoons in cartoon history, like hands down. An unpopular opinion, but Scooby himself was my least favorite character, and I'm not even afraid to admit that. Come for me. Anyway, this theory explores the fact we never get told why a group of teenagers and a dog are traveling around the country in a van. The producers were probably like, don't worry about it, no one's even gonna care, and then everyone's like, what's happening? Either way, this theory claims because the show premiered in 1969 and the Vietnam War was at its peak at that time, that the gang was actually driving to Canada to avoid being drafted. Everyone's just coming to Canada these days, I love it. Oh, Canada. The theory goes on to say Fred was drafted, but since he had all the mystery solving skills and zero combative skills, he knew he'd most likely die on the field, so he decided to run away with his fiancée Daphne. Since Velma is an activist for the war to stop, she went along with them, and Shaggy is clearly a hippie who's not going to war anytime soon, so he joined the gang as well. Coming in at number 5 are Tommy's and Jerry's. If anyone has anything bad to say about Tom and Jerry, then get out right now, because you need to put some respect on that show, because it paved so many people's childhoods. Like, I won't hear it. I won't hear it. This theory is crazy but interesting, so here goes. Apparently Tom and Jerry was Nazi propaganda. Hear me out, hear me out. Let's start with the names Tom and Jerry. Way back when, British soldiers were referred to as Tommies and German soldiers were called Jerrys. Tom is always the bad guy, and in every episode he does his level best to kill Jerry any way he can. But Jerry fools him every time, either by blowing him up with some dynamite or running back into his hole. I don't know. The show aired in 1940, the same year as the Battle of Britain, so the theory claims the show is just a coded message about superior German intelligence. What do we think about that? At number 4 is a series of unfortunate chicken. You have to love me for these names, I'm pretty proud of myself. Either way, Cow and Chicken in my opinion was one of the most annoying shows on the channel. That was the first show on when I got home from school and I was always just waiting for it to be over. Having said that, maybe I misjudged the whole thing. According to this fan theory from Redditor AJ of Stewart, Cow and Chicken was dark. Firstly, they're the only animals in the show. Everyone else is human, including their parents, but they're not. The duo get up to the most screwed up things that most parents would punish them for, but their parents seem oddly cool about everything. If anything, Chicken could kill someone and his dad would still be super proud of him. The theory claims the whole show takes place in Chicken's mind, since in reality, he's the bastard son of a broken home. Not to be confused with Jon Snow, because that's a different show. His dad puts him down all the time and emotionally abuses him, which is why in his head, his dad always just goes on about how proud of him he is. Cow is Chicken's sister, and in real life she's a slightly airheaded, emotionally needy, overweight girl, all because of growing up in the same toxic household as Chicken. So in his head, she's this helpless cow. He knows he's choosing to escape his reality rather than face it, which is why in his head he made himself a chicken. At least he's fully aware. Lastly, the weird devil character is every third-party adult he meets, like a divorce lawyer, his principal, the repo man, etc. And all in all, this hasn't made me like the show anymore. So sorry not sorry. Sucks to suck. Filling our number 3 slot are The Grim Adventures Part 1. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy was an interesting show for kids. I don't know whose idea it was to base a whole cartoon off the thing that represents death, but sure, we'll go with it. This series is similar to Ed, Edd and Eddy in the sense it assumes everyone living in Ennsville is dead, but that's the only similarity, I promise. The entire town is dead, and Billy's family is the most recently deceased family since they just moved there. Hence, they're also the most disturbed by everything going on around them. Grim reminds everyone that they're still awaiting judgment and to remind them of their sins. When he does go and collect souls, he's not killing them, he's actually escorting them to either God or Satan. In the episode Keeper of the Reaper, Billy's family is just about to move out of Ennsville, and so Mandy and him start arguing over who's gonna keep Grim, like he's some pet or something. This is a Grim Reaper, guys, he's not your goldfish. When really, the argument is actually which side does Grim serve? Is it hell, which Mandy represents with her harshness and cruelty, or is it heaven, which Billy represents with his innocence? In the end, the fact Billy doesn't leave means Grim serves both heaven and hell, but hell has more dominance over him, and we can see that because Mandy's the one that always tells Grim what to do. I think that's a banging theory, to be fair. Everything pretty much checks out. That's a yes from me. Now at number 2 are The Grim Adventures Part 2. This one is long-winded, so pay attention, guys. In the episode Who Killed Who, Mandy meets an elderly woman called Miss Doolin who tells Mandy she beat Grim in a staring contest once. After they diss Billy a bunch, Mandy leaves the house and realizes Miss Doolin was a ghost and that Grim had known her for a while but had come to reap her soul. It's like Miss Doolin knew Grim her whole life and constantly could beat death. Does that remind you of anyone? Mandy. Mandy wins over Grimm in every episode in arguments and things, and even look at the pendant Miss Doolin is wearing. It's a spider, and in the show we know Mandy quite likes spiders. At the very start of the show, Mandy could have easily beat Grimm in a staring contest, but she actually beat him in limbo. Miss Doolin is old and could have easily confused the limbo competition with the staring contest. So with all that explanation, the actual theory is that Mandy could be an old woman now who's remembering her childhood in the form of Miss Doolin. Instead of remembering humans, she remembers monsters because she's schizophrenic. As the show goes on, it just gets weirder and weirder, and that reflects Mandy slowly losing her mind. When she does finally die, that's when she realizes Grimm won for once. I'm saying for once like he even has to win more than once. Once you're dead, you're dead. And finally, at number 1 is The Tragedy Next Door. Codename Kids Next Door was so fun. I loved the missions they'd go on, and I'd pair up which ones had crushes on each other. Like number 4 and 3 were definitely a ting, you can't convince me otherwise. Either way, this theory is morbid. Dubbed as the hospital theory, this one says that all the kids were patients at a local hospital, and a nurse told them that they were all a squad of secret agents to make them feel better. Number 5's parents were divorced, and her dad left them poor. Her mum blamed the whole thing on her and beat her, hence she ended up in the hospital, and also why she's kind of like a mother figure to the group since she wants to be a better one than her own mum. And number 4 came from a rough neighborhood and got mugged by a man and didn't back off, so the dude ended up stabbing him, hence he's in the hospital. Number 3's family were all drug addicts and would abuse her. This is just not getting any lighter, I'm sorry. So one day she took her mum's antidepressants, but the next day her dad shot her mum, and she walked in on it and felt nothing because of the pills heavily affecting her. Her dad then shot her to leave no witnesses, but she survived and ended up at the hospital. Number 2 surprisingly actually had a pretty good loving upbringing. His parents really let his creativity flourish, but his uncle was jealous of him since his own abilities had never been encouraged, so he decides to overstuff him. Even when he says no, he forcefully feeds him, and so he ends up in the hospital because of obesity and the chance of heart failure. Number 1's dad had Alzheimer's, but he didn't mind taking care of him. He's the only adult number 1 actually liked, but after his mum disappeared, all the doctors and nurses just weren't looking after his dad. One day when he took him to the hospital, number 1 puked, and he found out he had cancer, and so he started hating adults after feeling like he was being tortured with chemo and whatnot. And so this squad of kids just went around just hating adults in the hospital ward.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Simpsons. So for this one, we have this rumored lost episode of The Simpsons that is said to be titled Dead Bart. Basically, rumor has it that this episode is based on the idea that Matt Groening has this ability to accurately predict the death of all of the guest stars from the show. I mean, it seems really far-fetched of course, but we've also seen scenarios where The Simpsons somehow accurately predicted something long before it happened. Anyways, this episode is said to have been aiming at putting this ability on full display by having it be animated to show each of the regulars or the stars of the show future death dates. Yeah, a little morbid, right? So according to internet legend, the show featured Bart being ripped out of a plane through the window. Okay, not great. This leads to his family going into mourning for a full year until they are nothing but skeleton versions of themselves. It is also said that the graveyard where Bart is buried is full of tombstones, all of which have the death dates of every Simpsons guest that had ever and will ever appear on the show. In our number 9 spot today, we have SpongeBob SquarePants. Okay, how could an episode of SpongeBob be scary? I mean, that jolly little sponge is like a ray of sunshine anywhere he goes in Bikini Bottom, but apparently there is one episode that is not like the others. Internet rumors have suggested that there is a lost, dark, eerie episode of SpongeBob that we are all definitely glad we haven't seen. Rumor says that this episode never even made it to the final edit because it was so dark. The rumor of its existence stems from someone who claims to have seen the episode while doing an internship with Nickelodeon. This episode is said to deal with really serious topics like death and maybe even Squidward taking his own life, which honestly is really messed up. The episode thankfully never made it to air, and it is said that while there was an investigation into the footage, nothing ever ended up coming of it. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Peanut Vendor. The Peanut Vendor was made in 1933, and it's a really short animated film and just shows a monkey who's singing a song. This sounds cute, but I assure you, it is the stuff of nightmares. The monkey is selling peanuts and a song is about how he is only there for a limited time, so everyone should come and buy some before they go to sleep. This all seems very reasonable, except for the fact that this animated monkey character does not look like a monkey at all and instead looks absolutely horrifying. If you put this guy next to Jason Voorhees, I feel like I would still be more scared of whatever he is. I feel like I do not want to buy his peanuts, but I'm afraid that if I don't, he's gonna come and find me. I truly didn't know that a 2-minute animated video could be this creepy, but they certainly delivered. In our number 7 spot today, we have Tom's Basement. Tom and Jerry is an absolute classic. What a silly little show with a great dynamic. Tom was of course the bloodthirsty cat, while Jerry was the quick, clever mouse, but apparently things for both of them turned sinister in a rumored lost episode called Tom's Basement. It is said that this lost episode was actually a short, and internet legend says that in the episode, Tom's owner told him to stay out of the basement. In fact, this owner is definitely a terrible person and is said to actually harm Tom in the episode anytime he gets near the basement door. Legend goes that Jerry ends up using this to his advantage and he starts to make Tom chase him into the basement, where he then hides while this terrible owner loses his temper. In the end, it is said that this situation continues to escalate and it leads to Jerry killing this guy. Him and Tom then end up hiding the body in the basement, and Jerry goes on to also kill Tom. I mean, what in the world? I'm just glad this episode isn't around anymore. In our number 6 spot today, we have Cat Dog. Cat Dog is actually a cartoon I can remember watching when I was a kid, and I remember it scaring the heck out of me. Cat Dog is half cat, half dog creature that gets itself into situations and has quite the time figuring everything out, considering the cat half and the dog half can't seem to get along with each other. This is just a weird premise in general, but it's not the strangest part of the show. There is an episode when Cat wants to brush Dog's teeth, and he crawls into his own mouth and travels through his own body to get to the dog side, where he then comes out of Dog's mouth. So now Cat is hanging out of Dog's mouth inside out with veins and muscles and everything we never wanted to see exposed. I know this was probably just meant to be like a silly little thing, but it's actually really scary and just a lot for anyone to even begin to try and comprehend. Maybe I'm looking into it a little too much as an adult, but overall this show just has a very weird vibe. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Kitchen Casanova. The Kitchen Casanova was made in 1996, great year, and was a part of Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon series. Basically, it's about a guy who's trying to prepare dinner for his date, but he's exceptionally nervous, and of course, Murphy's Law would have it that everything is going wrong. This cartoon was actually eventually pulled from air because of the fact that at one point he accidentally slices off his fingers and blood goes spurting everywhere, which probably isn't the ideal image for the target audience. I don't even think that this is the worst part. In the end, when the date arrives and he reveals this big meal that he made, it's actually just the grossest and creepiest looking thing ever, and it had me feeling very glad that I was only watching a cartoon. The dinner has eyeballs, bloody bones, a severed human foot, and a rolled up tongue that unfortunately unrolls and then twitches before being covered up again. It's a pile of gross, not really food. I could get past that except for the fact that they actually eat it. I just hate that so much. All in all, this whole thing is just very bizarre, and the ending leaves you with a super uncomfortable feeling. In our number 4 spot today, we have Ed, Edd and Eddy. I personally loved this show as a kid. It was so wacky and wild, but this rumored lost episode definitely doesn't seem like a good time. Legend has it that this lost episode is one that accidentally aired back in 2003. It is said that one day there was supposed to be a rerun of an already aired episode, but instead viewers found themselves watching something much more creepy. Apparently the characters were acting weird and the animation was super choppy. From here, in the last 3 minutes of the episode, claymation characters start to take over, and the episode in general is just really strange and uncomfortable and eerie. People on the internet have said that the episode was just wrong on all levels, and it left them with just a really sinister feeling. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Powerpuff Girls. Sugar, spice, and everything nice, the Powerpuff Girls is a classic show that might be surprising to see on this list, unless you have seen or at least heard of this rumored lost episode. While usual episodes of the show saw our three superheroes Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup along with their creator Professor Utonium just kicking butt and taking names, this lost episode is said to have shown something much darker. This episode is said to follow Professor Utonium as he encounters a terrifying, dark, zombie-like version of Bubbles. Apparently this Bubbles is on some sort of killing rampage. Yeah, definitely not the type of Powerpuff episode we're used to seeing. In our number 2 spot today we have Ren and Stimpy. This lost episode of Ren and Stimpy is said to have been titled Man's Best Friend. Rumor has it that this episode was meant to be aired during the original run of the second season, but it never ended up making it to air. This is because it was said to be too controversial. The most important or controversial scene in question from this lost episode is said to have seen Ren getting really violent. In this outburst, people said he was seen smoking cigars after he harmed and almost took someone's life. Rumor has it that the creation of this episode got one of the show's creators fired. This lost episode apparently stayed hidden and didn't air until 11 years later, when that rumored fired creator was able to air it on Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, which was the revival of the original series on Spike. In our number 1 spot today we have Barney and Friends. This is said to be a lost episode of Barney and Friends that recently came to light on TikTok. Many users were claiming that they were now remembering this dark episode that they had watched many years ago, and people were claiming that this episode was so dark it made them feel basically traumatized. While Barney and Friends usually had episodes that taught us the value of friendship and good relationships, this episode is said to have a much darker tone and allegedly only aired one single time. The episode in question is said to have been called Death, and many people have claimed that when the theme music started to play, you could hear a sort of creepy whispering just behind the music. After this, everything seemed to return to normal until Barney awoke. When Barney spoke, it was both the sound of his normal giggly voice, but there was also something darker behind it, like another voice underneath that was lower and just sinister sounding. Apparently, this is the episode where Barney said that he was going to teach about death. People on TikTok have said that the episode ends with Barney going on a rampage and killing all of his friends on set, and at the end, he's still saying the classic I love you, you love me song, but just in a bit more of a screamy, demonic way than I think any of us are probably used to. So yeah, while I'm not entirely sure this episode ever existed, if it did, I think it's probably for the best that it stays lost in the past. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Courage the Cowardly Dog. We are starting this list off with intention today because I feel like this is one of the most widely feared children's cartoons ever. Courage the Cowardly Dog is an absolutely iconic cartoon that I can vividly remember absolutely terrifying me as a child. The show is basically just about Courage, who is a dog with human-like characteristics, and his elderly owners. The three all live in the middle of nowhere, and each episode they are thrown into different insane, bizarre, and usually really disturbing situations that they have to get out of. The show is known for its extremely eerie and creepy atmosphere and the energy that the show gives off. Contrary to the name, Courage is a dog who is very easily frightened. He was abandoned when he was a puppy after his parents were sent into outer space, and this is when the very friendly Muriel found him and took him in. Muriel, however, is married to the grumpy, mean, and greedy Eustace, who is often quite rude to Courage. Despite being terrified, Courage always finds a way to face his fears in order to protect his owners, and I think that is something that we can all appreciate. All in all, Courage the Cowardly Dog is a fantastic cartoon, but it is most definitely very surreal and pretty unbelievable at times. In our number 9 spot today we have The Kitchen Casanova. The Kitchen Casanova was made in 1996 and was a part of Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon series. Basically, it was about a guy who was trying to prepare dinner for his date, but he is exceptionally nervous, and of course Murphy's Law would have it that everything is going wrong. This cartoon was actually eventually pulled from air because of the fact that at one point he accidentally slices off one of his fingers and blood goes spurting everywhere, which probably isn't an ideal image for children, but I honestly don't even think that was the worst part. In the end, when the date arrives and he reveals the big meal he made, it's actually just the grossest and creepiest looking thing ever, and it had me feeling very glad that I was only watching a cartoon. The dinner partner has eyeballs, bloody bones, a severed human foot, and a rolled up tongue that unfortunately unrolls, and then twitches before being covered up again. Okay, so it's a pile of gross, really not food, and I could get past that except for the fact that they actually eat it. I just hate that so much. Why did they have to? All in all, the whole thing is just very bizarre, and the ending leaves you with a really uncomfortable feeling. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Cameraman's Revenge. The Cameraman's Revenge comes all the way from 1912, and it is unlike anything I have ever seen before, which after watching it, I feel pretty incredibly grateful for. Basically, the whole show is just a bunch of bugs, and I just want to start off by making it clear that these are very real, dead bugs that are being used as puppets, okay? Nightmare fuel enough. That's too much. That little tidbit is enough to make me say no thank you, but if that's not enough to deter you, surely the strange plot will. Basically, Mr. Beetle is out on town and looking for some companionship when he sees a very beautiful lady dragonfly who he flirts with. Unbeknownst to Mr. Beetle, the dragonfly's ex-boyfriend, a grasshopper who is a cameraman, sees this whole thing going down and is very jealous. Well, as it turns out, Mr. Beetle has a Mrs. Beetle who hears about this infidelity from the grasshopper, but as it turns out, she is having her own kind of adulterous experience. You really have to see this one to believe it. It's a bunch of, it's just a bunch of unfaithful bugs. I don't know, and it's stop motion of dead bugs, which just makes it something I'll really never forget. But man, I wish I could. I really do. In our number 7 spot today, we have Sunshine. Sunshine, or Little Sun, is a show from Czechoslovakia that ran from 1979 until 1989, and unfortunately, it's actually pretty hard to find most of the episodes that aired. There were different segments in the show and different characters, and while most of it was fairly normal for the 1980s, there's just one character in this show that is well known for just being extremely creepy. He's not exactly a cartoon, but he is a puppet, and I just had to include him. The character's name is Radifak Plachta, which translates to something like Big Nose Blanket. The character is made up of 2 men under a blanket, and he has a super long neck. He has an absolutely terrifying voice that honestly would be suitable for a serial killer instead of a children's TV show, and the TV station that ran this show had been called Avant-Garde for not being afraid to show a puppet that isn't pretty, but I don't think not pretty is the best way to put it. I think downright terrifying is a far more accurate description of this guy. It's so creepy, but it's so 1980s. In our number 6 spot today, we have Cat Dog. Cat Dog is actually a cartoon I can remember watching when I was a kid, and I do remember it scaring the heck out of me. Maybe I was just easily scared, but I don't think so. Cat Dog is half cat, half dog creature that gets itself into situations and has quite the time figuring everything out, considering the whole cat half and dog half can't seem to get along with each other. This is already a weird premise, but it's not even the strangest part of the show. There is an episode when Cat wants to brush Dog's teeth, and he crawls into his own mouth and travels through its own body to get to the dog side, where it then comes out of Dog's mouth. So now, Cat is hanging out of Dog's mouth, inside out, veins and muscles and everything we never want to see exposed. I know this was probably meant to just be a silly little thing, but it's scary. I don't know, man. It's a lot for me to process. I can't even imagine a child. Maybe I'm looking into it a little too much, but like, I don't know. There's just a weird vibe going on here. I don't like it. No thank you. In our number 5 spot today, we have Frothy Dog. Moving on from Cat Dog to Frothy Dog, alright? Frothy Dog was a part of Cartoon Network's Cartoons That Never Made It. You'll soon find out why. This series of shorts were small little cartoons that would play sometimes before commercials, or they would be put in somewhere to break up a longer running show, and the whole point of them were that they were supposed to be these little snippets or promos for cartoons that didn't ever get fleshed out into full shows, for very obvious reasons. Frothy Dog is the show that never was, and it is about exactly what you were most likely assuming it is about, which is a dog with rabies. The short features a pretty upbeat tune, so it's not necessarily scary, but it's very disturbing. Some of the lyrics are things like, "You can look, but you shouldn't touch, or else he'll gnaw your arm off." Okay, not exactly a nice ring. Or another part where they explain that Frothy is always smiling because he has lockjaw. Alright, I can't believe this is real. At the end of the day, I feel extremely grateful that this is one that never made it into a full series because I just don't think anyone really needs a frothy dog in their life, and I stand by that. In our number 4 spot today, we have Happy Tree Friends. Happy Tree Friends is absolutely not a show I would ever show to a child for many reasons, okay? Just get that out there. I think that's important to start off with. This show is an adult cartoon that is disguised like a kid's show. If you just saw the characters, you would have no idea what dark things really happen because all of the characters are cute little forest animals and the animation is very bright and very colorful, but this show is actually pretty horrifying. Each episode shows these cute little forest animals getting into extremely violent and graphic situations. Sometimes it is through accidents and sometimes it is absolutely deliberate, and the violence ranges from smaller injuries and pain to some pretty full-blown gruesome activity. Most of the characters who die in the show do find themselves reincarnated for the next episode though, so I guess that's a plus. I'm just trying to find the bright side here, you know, glass half full. In our number 3 spot today, we have Ghostly Thrillers. Ghostly Thrillers is a creepy little animated movie that features 2 stories. One being The Youth Who Wanted to Shiver, which is about a boy who isn't afraid of anything, so he sets out on an adventure to learn how to shiver in fear. But it's the other part of this film, called Ghost in the Shed, that I really want to talk about today. Ghost in the Shed starts off with a traveling salesman who unfortunately knocks on the wrong door one day. He knocks on a farmer's door just before dusk and asks if he can spend the night. The farmer and his sons are more than happy to have him stay because they actually just end up killing and robbing him before the sun comes up the next day. After this, they buried his body underneath the shed in the back and no one ever suspected a thing. Flash forward quite a few years and the area has become more populated and a new family lives in the house now. This new family obviously doesn't know about the body buried in the back, and they're actually good people and not killers. The salesman's spirit, of course, has been lingering around and he won't move on to the other side until he gets someone to find his body so that people can know what happened to him. Basically, the rest of the film is just the salesman haunting this family until they finally dig up the backyard and find his skeleton, and honestly the whole concept is just not something I would have assumed would be for children. I feel like there are real adult horror movies with the exact same plot, so this might just be one to skip over for the kids. In our number 2 spot today, we have Feline Follies. Feline Follies was created in 1919 and was the first time we got to see the character of Felix the cat. This cartoon shows Felix, who is called Master Tom at this point, meeting a female white cat. Felix serenades her and they fall in lust with each other, and Felix says that he will devote all 9 of his lives to her. How romantic. He even sings so loud he wakes up an entire neighborhood. While this is all going on, a group of mice have broken into Felix's home and basically just trashed it. When Felix's owner comes home and sees the mess, she blames Felix and ends up throwing him out of the house. This is when Felix decides that he will go and live with his new lady cat friend. To Felix's surprise, he now realizes that he is the father to an entire litter of kittens. At this point, you might be asking yourself how this cartoon is dark and how it could have possibly made it this high on the list. Well, it is how this one ends that really gets you. Felix obviously wasn't ready for the consequence of his actions because once he sees all of his little kitten children, his reaction is to run away. He runs towards the local gas house where he lays down and sticks a hose in his mouth and turns it on. So basically, he just takes his own life by intentionally inhaling coal gas. Definitely not how I thought this one was gonna turn out, and what a questionable storyline for a children's cartoon overall. What were people thinking, man? In our number 1 spot today, we have The Devil's Ball, or The Mascot. This stop-motion animated short comes from 1933 and is honestly quite a ride and a mix between fascinating and terrifying. Basically, it starts off fairly normal and fine, with a stuffed dog named Duffy coming to life and then heading out on an adventure for an orange, but this isn't what we are here to talk about today. Once midnight strikes, the devil comes out of a liquor bottle, and this is when things really start to get crazy. So basically now the devil is holding some kind of soiree, and things such as different creatures, vegetables, old garbage, it all begins to come to life and displaying human characteristics, and these are the guests of the ball. Over the course of the ball, we see some pretty spooky things, like when the devil tries to convince one of the guests to stab someone. Duffy is kind of the saving grace of this whole thing because Duffy is actually cute and basically the only creature in this whole thing that isn't absolutely terrifying. All in all, the whole thing was originally 40 minutes, but it is tough to find that version, and most you will find now are a 25-minute cut. It certainly is worth a watch, but I wouldn't necessarily show this one to any children unless you want them to be scarred for life. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Ed, Edd and Eddy. Ed, Edd and Eddy ran for 5 seasons, and it's been rumored that among all these episodes that were aired, there was one that went missing and was only shown once on TV before it never aired again. The rumor started in 2001, and it was alleged that this missing episode was called The Scarecrow Boy. For a short summary of the episode, Sarah puts on a play, her own version of The Wizard of Oz, casting herself as Dorothy, Jimmy as the Tin Man, Eddie as the Cowardly Lion, Ed as the Scarecrow, and Double D as the director. After rehearsing, Sarah becomes so mad at Ed for messing up his lines that she decides to lock him out of the house. Since he was in his costume when this happened, the other kids in the neighborhood began making fun of him, calling him Scarecrow Boy. Even crazier, every time he is called Scarecrow Boy, he becomes stiffer, eventually turning into one. There's pretty much no evidence that this episode ever existed, other than fans claiming that they once watched it on TV. In our number 9 spot today, we have Inspector Gadget. In the show Inspector Gadget, we never see the evil Dr. Claw's face on screen. However, there's been a long-standing urban legend that we did see him at one point. In this one mysterious episode, we got a glimpse of his face, and that was later used as the inspiration for the action figure of Dr. Claw, which now shows his face. The creators knew this was a huge deal at the time, and when you went to buy the action figure in stores, they covered up his face in the packaging, so you had to buy it back in the day to see what Mr. Claw looked like. These days, you can just Google it and it'll be the first thing that pops up. His face is also briefly visible in the Inspector Gadget game for the Super Nintendo, but since the quality of the game was pretty bad, we never got a good look until the action figure. In our number 8 spot today, we have Dungeons & Dragons. In the 1980s Dungeons & Dragons cartoon show, there is a famous urban legend that the last episode of the show shared a crazy secret about the entire show that changes everything. The episode itself also reportedly never made it to TV, but some people claimed that it was accidentally aired once. This episode revealed that all of the characters were actually killed in a roller coaster accident, and they ended up in the afterlife. The writer who made the real final episode has denied these claims numerous times, and he even uploaded his script to prove it. In the ending, the kids deliberated after being offered a choice whether to go back to Earth or continue fighting in the D&D world. In our number 7 spot today, we have Gravity Falls. The story with the show Gravity Falls was that allegedly it was supposed to be 3 seasons, but was cut down to only 2 seasons after Alex Hirsch decided he wanted to wrap up the show. Apparently, many fans think that there were a lot of unanswered questions that would have been answered in this rumored 3rd season. The source of this idea comes from a Reddit AMA done after the season 1 finale, where a fan asked how many seasons he'd ideally like the show to last, with Hirsch's response being that he originally considered 3 seasons but now believed that was too much. Hirsch would say many times over the years that the show was never planned to have 3 seasons, and blames the rumor on the fact that he was not allowed to announce that season 2 was the last season when he first learned so. In our number 6 spot today, we have Phineas and Ferb. Phineas and Ferb is one of those cartoons where there are so many strange theories, it's hard to know where to start. But the most insane one that I have ever heard of claims that Dr. Doofenshmirtz, the evil madman, is actually the father of Phineas. The main evidence is that Phineas and Doofenshmirtz both have the same shaped heads. Let's break this down. We know that Linda, Phineas's mom, and Doof actually dated way back, so not hard to assume that they could have birthed a child. The story is that the couple dated when they were both really young and eventually split up. Both of them go on to get married to other people and have kids with them. That explains Candace's father. After a few years, Linda either splits from Candace's dad and has a fling with Doof, or she cheats with Doof. Either way, it results in the birth of Phineas. Then, years later, she meets Ferb's dad, they get married, and then they turn into one big family. In our number 5 spot today, we have Strawberry Shortcake. Okay, so basically this isn't necessarily inherently terrifying, but it's kind of crazy to see the power of rumors and how even while the truth is out there, some people will still believe falsities. Basically, this story has to do with Strawberry Shortcake and how there was some troll out there who claimed to be the niece of someone working for the entertainment company that makes the show. Basically, this person went on to spread a ton of rumors, mostly relating to season 4, that includes a ton of false synopsis, and they even manipulated some audio and released it as proof. In the end, this of course was bound to cause trouble, so people began trying to clear the air, and of course once the season was actually released, it was clear that this troll had just released a bunch of lies. In the end, however, despite all of the proof that these were false claims, there are many people out there who still choose to reject the truth and take these lies as reality. In our number 4 spot today, we have Mickey Mouse. So basically this is a legend that starts out 100% true. Basically it starts out saying that on September 1st, 1939, the BBC broadcast of the Mickey Mouse cartoon Mickey's Gala premiere was abruptly interrupted and ceased due to the sudden outbreak of World War II. That's terrible, and it's absolutely terrifying. The legend goes on to claim that after the war ended and when broadcasts resumed, that the episode was picked up in the exact same moment as when it had previously been interrupted all those years ago. That certainly would have been slightly symbolic, but also exceptionally eerie, but it turns out that that is not true. While it is true that the cartoon was indeed the last program shown by the BBC before suspension, it aired in its entirety before the interruption in 1939, as well as after the interruption in 1946. It is believed that this legend came from a 1984 documentary which showed exactly what the legend described, but this was likely placed in the documentary for dramatic effect. In our number 3 spot today, we have Gravity Falls 2. For another Gravity Falls urban legend, we have this one that circulated the internet. Basically, it comes in the form of a screenshot that shows Dipper and Mabel with a slender man standing there watching them from behind. Definitely creepy, but turns out that this is in fact not real. The actual episode shows no slender man, and creator Alex Hirsch actually commented on this legend in an interview. He noted that one of the very first times he overheard someone talking about the show after its premiere was when he heard someone telling another person that the legend was true. Despite this rumor not being true at all, there is actually a Slender Man appearance in Gravity Falls media, and it's a one-panel cameo in the story titled Face It, which is in the graphic novel Gravity Falls Lost Legends. In our number 2 spot today, we have Hey Arnold. Hey Arnold is an absolutely classic cartoon, but this legend surrounding the episode titled Pigeon Man is quite dark. Basically, in this episode, there's a character who is called the Pigeon Man, and the legend suggests that in the original ending of this episode, he takes his own life after finding his home destroyed. The legend continues on to say that Nickelodeon forced the writers to change the ending because they were worried it was too dark, and if this were true, I would certainly be inclined to agree. In the end, however, this legend was in fact debunked by the show creator himself, Craig Bartlett. That was never the intended ending, and I think that's probably a good thing. In the actual ending of the show, the Pigeon Man flies away with the pigeons, and because of this dark rumor, people speculate that this was actually his death, but that is also likely untrue because of his subsequent appearances later on. In our number 1 spot today, we have King of the Hill. King of the Hill had one episode that was subject to the internet's weirdest and darkest rumors. The episode in question is called Pygmalion. The episode as a whole is wild, and it's really dark and creepy, which is exactly why it isn't really a surprise that there's a dark legend surrounding it. Basically, in this episode, there's a character called Trip Larson who suffers from quite a few serious things, and he also inherited the Larson's pork products plant from his father. Long story short, he does some messed up stuff and ends up meeting a gruesome fate in the end. I'll spare you the gory details. So basically, according to urban legend, it says that after Trip's death, while Peggy and Luann are talking and celebrating, you can see an incredibly graphic and dark image of Trip's body behind them. There is simply no evidence that this ever happened, and it's likely just a really dark story that had its origins somewhere on the internet, but you really just wonder exactly where this sort of thing came from. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have The Mysterious Stranger. The Adventures of Mark Twain is a stop-motion claymation film that was made based around a few different Mark Twain works, but the one that I want to specifically talk about today is the part of The Mysterious Stranger. This movie was released in 1986, and it is seriously dark. It is basically just a social commentary that addresses Twain's views of organized religion, the moral sense, and basically just how the human race is damned. There is also a character of Satan that is truly one of the creepiest depictions I have ever seen. Claymation is obviously an incredible animation style, but there is something extremely eerie about it as well. So the creepy claymation coupled with the underlying tone of this cartoon definitely makes for a cartoon I don't think I would have enjoyed as a child. This entire part of the film is basically just an existential crisis all rolled up into a weird little cartoon. In our number 9 spot today, we have Frothy Dog. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. Frothy Dog was a part of the Cartoon Network's Cartoons That Never Made It. This was a series of shorts that were small little cartoons that would play sometimes before commercials, or they would be put in somewhere to break up a longer running show, and the whole point of them were that they were supposed to be these little snippets or promos for cartoons that didn't ever get fleshed out into full shows for very obvious reasons. Frothy Dog is the show that never was, and it is about exactly what you are most likely assuming it is about, which is a dog with rabies. The short features a pretty upbeat tune, so it's not necessarily scary at all, but man, it is pretty disturbing. Some of the lyrics are things like, "You can look, but you shouldn't touch, or else he'll gnaw your arm off," or another part where they explain that Frothy is always smiling because he has lockjaw. At the end of the day, I feel extremely grateful that this one was never made into a full series, because I just don't think anyone really needs a frothy dog in their life. In our number 8 spot today, we have Happy Tree Friends. Happy Tree Friends is absolutely not a show I would ever show to a child for many reasons. This show is an adult cartoon that is disguised like a kids show. If you just saw the characters, you would have no idea what dark things really happen, because all of the characters are cute little forest animals and the animation is very bright and colorful. But the show is actually pretty horrifying. Each episode shows these cute little forest animals getting into extremely violent and graphic situations. Sometimes it is through accidents and sometimes it is absolutely deliberate, and the violence ranges from smaller injuries and pain to some pretty full-blown gruesome activity. Most of the characters who die in the show do find themselves reincarnated for the next episodes though, so I guess that's a plus? In our number 7 spot today, we have Invader Zim. Invader Zim was a cartoon about an alien named Zim who is from the planet Urk. Zim has a plan to conquer Earth and enslave humans. The show in its entirety is a dark comedy, but it's not overly terrifying, but there is one specific segment from an episode that I want to talk about today. The segment is titled Dark Harvest, and it is the second segment from the 4th episode of the very first season. In this episode, Zim, who is pretending to be a child at a school, which is already just a creepy concept by the way, begins harvesting the organs of other children at school and replacing them with random gadgets. The whole episode is just a lot to handle, but I think the worst part is when he steals one kid's liver and replaces it with an explosive. What kind of children's show is this? Basically, no matter who tries to stop Zim on his organ stealing spree is unsuccessful and ends up having one less organ, and just the entire episode is presented like a horror movie. I feel like if this was a live action show instead of a cartoon, it probably would have been rated R. In our number 6 spot today, we have Balloon Land. Balloon Land is an animated short film that comes from 1935, and it of course takes place in a town called Balloon Land, whose residents are made out of balloons. Basically, the residents are up against the villainous Pincushion Man, who goes around trying to poke all of the balloon residents with his pins. While this isn't the scariest cartoon on today's list, there is something strangely terrifying about this short. Old animation is both incredible but also extremely eerie. Around the middle of the film, there is a song that the Pincushion Man walks around singing, and it is so creepy. Between the great voice acting, to the strange way that he moves, and even to the lyrics of the song, I definitely feel like I want to stay away from the Pincushion Man. While I didn't watch this cartoon short as a kid, I feel like if I did, he might have been one of those creepy characters that just sticks with you. In our number 5 spot today, we have Swing You Sinners. Swing You Sinners comes to us from 1930, and it was a part of the Talk Cartoons series. This cartoon is very well known for its dark and surreal and pretty abstract content. This cartoon follows Bimbo as he is out trying to steal chickens. As he's attempting to steal one, he gets caught by the police. Bimbo tries to get away and ends up finding himself locked inside of a cemetery after the door grows a mouth and swallows the lock and key, and this is when things really go awry. He very quickly finds out that the cemetery is haunted, not just by ghosts, but also by monsters. These scary creatures then begin to tell him about how he will be punished for his sins. Despite Bimbo begging for forgiveness, these creatures are unrelenting, which is honestly pretty scary and kind of sad. I wish I could continue on to explain a nice and happy ending to this cartoon, but apparently 1930 was just a very dark time. Bimbo continues to be threatened and chased by the creatures until he eventually falls into hell, and it is there where he gets eaten by a huge skull, and that's just how this cartoon ends. I guess the moral of the story is don't steal chickens and stay the heck away from the 1930s? In our number 4 spot today, we have Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids. Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids was originally a series of books that ended up being turned into an animated series. The series ended up becoming extremely popular because of the fact that it was enjoyed by both adults and children, and people enjoyed how freaky it was mixed with the show's dark humor. There's a specific episode that I want to talk about today though, and that is the episode of the the Barber of Civil. This is the 9th episode of this series, and it focuses around Tanya and Peregrine, who are the rudest children ever. Both of these children end up getting in trouble at school one day, and they get sent to the headmaster's office. In the office, they end up being so cheeky that they make the headmaster faint. The following day, there is a new barber in town who is offering free haircuts for all the children. I'm sure this is a great business technique, but it's also pretty creepy if we're being honest. This new barber sees how terrible these two specific children are being, and he invites them for their free haircuts. When the pair gets to the shop, they see a big glass jar that looks like it's full of slugs. Peregrine pretends to eat one of these slugs, but the barber walks in and surprises him, which causes him to accidentally swallow the slug. At the same time, the glass jar falls and smashes, and that is when we hear a bunch of cheeky whispers. This is when it is revealed that the barber is not actually a barber at all, but he teaches rude children how to behave better, and that jar of slugs was actually the tongues of foul-mouthed children. The next day, Tanya and Peregrine return to school as completely different children, and that barber was never seen again. I guess this has a good moral to not be mean, but I also feel like there's a good lesson to not go to a barber that is offering free haircuts to children and only children. I'm not really sure. In our number 3 spot today, we have Ghostly Thrillers. Ghostly Thrillers is a creepy little animated movie that features 2 stories. One being The Youth Who Wanted to Shiver, which is about a boy who isn't afraid of anything, so he sets out on an adventure to learn how to shiver in fear. But it's the other part of the film called Ghost in the Shed that I really want to talk about today. Ghost in the Shed starts off with a traveling salesman who unfortunately knocks on the wrong door one day. He knocks on a farmer's door just before dusk and asks if he can spend the night. The farmer and his sons are more than happy to have him stay because they just actually end up killing and robbing him before the sun comes up the next day. After this, they buried his body under the shed in the backyard, and no one ever suspected a thing. Flash forward quite a few years, and the area has now become more populated, and a new family lives in this house now. This new family obviously doesn't know about the body buried in the back, and they're actually good people and not killers. The salesman's spirit, of course, has been lingering around, and he won't move on to the other side until he gets someone to find his body so that people can know what happened to him. Basically, the rest of the film is just the salesman haunting this family until they finally dig up the backyard and find his skeleton, and honestly, this whole concept is just not something I would have assumed would be for children. I feel like there are real adult horror movies with the same plot, so this might be one to just skip over for the kids. In our number 2 spot today, we have Feline Follies. Feline Follies was created in 1919 and was the first time we ever got to see the character of Felix the cat. This cartoon shows Felix, who is called Master Tom at this point, meeting a female white cat. Felix serenades her and they fall in lust with each other, and Felix says that he will devote all 9 of his lives to her. He even sings so loudly he wakes up an entire neighborhood. While this is all going on, a group of mice have broken into Felix's home and basically trashed it. When Felix's owner comes home and sees the mess, she blames Felix and ends up throwing him out of the house. This is when Felix decides that he will go and live with his new lady cat friend. To Felix's surprise, he now realizes that he is the father to an entire litter of kittens. At this point, you might be asking yourself how this cartoon is dark and how it could have possibly made it this high on the list. Well, it is how this one ends that really gets you. Felix obviously wasn't ready for the consequence of his actions, because once he sees all of these little kitten children, his reaction is to run away. He runs towards the local gas house where he lays down and sticks a hose in his mouth and turns it on. So basically he just ends up taking his own life by intentionally inhaling coal gas. Definitely not how I thought this one was going to turn out, and what a questionable storyline for a children's cartoon overall. In our number 1 spot today, you guys wanted to see this one, we have Courage the Cowardly Dog. I feel like this one is the most widely feared children's cartoon. Courage the Cowardly Dog is an absolutely iconic cartoon that I can vividly remember absolutely terrifying me as a child. The show is basically just about Courage, who is a dog with human-like characteristics, and his elderly owners. The 3 all live in the middle of nowhere, and each episode they are thrown into different, insane, bizarre, and usually usually disturbing situations that they have to get out of. The show is known for its extremely eerie and creepy atmosphere and just the entire energy that the show gives off. Contrary to the name, Courage is a dog who is very easily frightened. He was abandoned when he was a puppy after his parents were sent into outer space, and this is when the very friendly Muriel found him and took him in. Muriel is married to the grumpy, mean, and greedy Eustace, who is often quite rude to Courage. Despite being terrified, Courage always finds a way to face his fears in order to protect his owners, and I think that is something that we can all appreciate. All in all, Courage the Cowardly Dog is a fantastic cartoon, but it is most definitely also extremely surreal and pretty unbelievable at times.
Kicking off the list at number 10, SpongeBob SquarePants. Season 9, episode 11. Yeah, the sea sponge was well on his way when the scandals hit this time. SpongeBob kicked off in 1999, also a childhood favorite of mine. I'm growing into Squidward now. I feel it mentally and physically. I'm like, I've got these long squid-like tentacle arms. The 11th episode of the 9th season was titled You're Fired, and apparently it sent all the wrong messages. This is quite controversial. Mr. Krabs learns he can save a nickel, literally, by firing the fry cook SpongeBob SquarePants. Patrick tries to cheer SpongeBob up by having fun all day around town, you know, goofing around, more or less ignoring some adult responsibilities, and at the end of the episode, he chills out. He starts applying to other restaurants, whatever. Political debates surrounded this one. Apparently, it was sending the wrong messages to our youth about the responsibilities of being a working adult. Listen, I get that. He's also a sponge. Also, maybe let's not forget why SpongeBob got fired in the first place. Like, let's talk about that more, maybe. Also, does Patrick even have a job? Let's get some resumes going for him before we give SpongeBob a hard time. Guy's the only cook. Give him a holiday. Number 9, Arthur. I swear, DW, she made me more angry growing up than my own siblings did. Ooh, Dora Winfred Reed. Nothing but trouble she is. Another gem from our childhood. This animated family epic began in 1996. It officially ended a month ago. Apparently that was a nice surprise. Woke up, checked Twitter one morning, Arthur's like a hipster now in a cafe. Muffy's running for mayor. Buster's a teacher. Are we old? We're old. I'm old. Oh, I knew it. While the show was running this whole time, the showrunners had tons of backlash for one episode in particular, appropriately titled Bleep. The whole episode is centered around DW, of course, as she learns a curse word. We don't know what it is, of course, but she says it a lot. There's a lot of bleeps in this episode. Executive producer Carol Greenwald said in an interview recently that the episode received the most mail and feedback out of all of them. Yeah, they got letters, handwritten letters. I remember this episode. I remember seeing it. And I'm now doing stand-up comedy and cursing quite a bit. So more than fair. That's a good call. My mom was probably one of those letters. She's like, okay. Number 8, Sailor Mouth. Yeah, remember this one? Arthur moms weren't ready for this one, not at all. Again, another episode I clearly remember watching. I hope you do as well, that's why I picked these. It's one of the most controversial when it comes to Bikini Bottom. Sailor Mouth, yeah, we're out here getting upset because Dora Winfred Reed learned one curse word. Well, in season 2, episode 28, SpongeBob learned them all. All of them, all 13. Originally, SquarePants learns one word from reading the back of a dumpster, you know, behind the Krusty Krab, just a great place for education. And he says it, and a dolphin sound is heard. And the garbage man nearby is like, I have never. He's like a YouTube thumbnail. He's like, oh. Patrick convinces SpongeBob that it's a sentence enhancer, but Mr. Krabs later corrects them. As a punishment, Mr. Krabs makes the dirty duo paint the Krusty Krab over, but when Mr. Krabs stubs his toe and says all 13 forbidden words, well, now he's in trouble. The 3 Sailor Mouth vigilantes then have to go and paint Mr. Krabs' mom's house as a punishment. It's funny, but yeah, same issues. Parents believe this one was encouraging foul language. To this day, it's one of the most controversial episodes under the sea. Again, I have to agree. That was a rhyme. Under the sea, I agree. Number 7, Stokey the Bear. Let's get stoked for this one. In many cartoons growing up, there was always a hidden message, or a very obvious, clear message. Like, you know, preventing forest fires, for example. It's a pretty obvious message when it comes to our pal Smokey the Bear. That's his one message. He kind of nails it, I don't know. The United States Forest Service wasn't too pleased when the second episode of Dudley Do-Right of the Mounties parodied their safety bear. This parody aired during the Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle episode 16, so a lot of people saw it. The whole episode is like a bizarro version of Smokey. The punchline in this episode was that he was responsible for the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Yeah, not a great bit. That's not funny. I don't know. The episode was obviously pulled and hasn't seen the light of day ever again. Yeah, can't show kids lighting fires in forests. I was gonna insert a link, but I'm like, actually, don't. hit that thumbs up for safety. If you want to see the link, hit that thumbs up instead. No fires in this house. Number 6, The Mask of Matches Malone. Mask matches Malone. It's kind of like a tongue twister. Going back to the nerd days for this one, here we go, let's go. The Brave and the Bold is an animated Batman series. It's actually amazing. The respect I have for DC with their animated series and their comics, they're dark, they're great. They've always been dark and they've always been great. But sometimes with a cartoon, you can cross the line with the content, even if it's lighthearted. For example, Brave and the Bold came after Batman the Animated Series. It was supposed to lighten up the mood, but an episode that only appears on season 3's DVD bonus features a Birds of Prey song. A nice catchy song to get stuck in your head. How fun. We love those. Catwoman, Huntress, Black Canary, they all do this fun musical number, just absolutely roasting the Justice League. The content was inappropriate. It was sexual in nature, something about Aquaman and a little fish, you know. You can connect those dots in your head. The jokes were great, but certainly not for a cartoon. The 2020 Birds of Prey movie was rated R. You know what I mean? So sometimes the content has to be harsh in order for it to be comic accurate. Number 5, Pokemon. Ooh, lots of nostalgia for this one. Here we go. Gotta catch them all. This was a staple of my childhood. Pokemon is great. Apparently I can't get enough, even as a 27-year-old. I see Pokemon Go in the App Store and I'm like, do I do it? Do I commit? My data plan's like, no, you do not commit. Go, get out of here. I want to be a speed walker and collect them all. So tempting. An episode that aired in 1997 was titled Electric Soldier Porygon. It was all but fun and games, really. It was pulled off the air almost immediately because these bright strobe-like animations. Yeah, it was causing seizures. This is an issue that can repeat itself even today. When I saw Incredibles 2 in theaters when it first came out, opening night, you know what's up. There's a scene where the villain, Screenslaver, is fighting Elastigirl, but there's crazy flashes the entire time. It's supposed to confuse Elastigirl, it's the whole point. Disney Pixar had to edit the scene and then re-release it because of medical issues, just like the same thing with Electric Soldier Porygon. So, it can even happen today. We're not learning yet. Number 4, gargoyles. Another staple from my childhood. Here we go. What a fun list. Allow me to do more, please. Hit that so I can do more into my childhood. Here we go. Born the same year as I was, gargoyles kicked off in 1994. Gargoyles who come to life at night and protect the city. What's there not to love, honestly? Concept art for the canceled live-action Disney movie had the internet buzzing recently. And with Disney Plus being so successful, never say never to a live adaptation. Just don't expect it to be the season 1 episode titled Deadly Force. That probably won't make it into the final script. Again, I'll reinforce that cartoons, their first objective is to send a message. Sometimes that message is just too dark in nature. A cartoon like Gargoyles explaining the dangers of firearms, yeah, they had good intentions, but listen to what I just said. Obviously, it's gonna be scary. When the human detective Eliza is severely injured and barely survives emergency surgery, the staff still views the episode as a teachable moment. So on Disney XD and Toon Disney, the scenes are recut. So now you just see Eliza's face the whole time instead of the horrible scene that they originally released. Yeah, it's still jarring to see just her face in a horrible situation. So yeah, the whole message is don't play with firearms, but like honestly, it's so scary. Way more haunting, but I don't know.